Hi, everyone. This is Michael Turner with New York State Higher Education Services Corporation. We are the state agency that's in charge of administering all of New York's financial aid program, including the application we're going to be talking about today, which is the New York State Tuition Assistance Program application, or TAP application. In addition to TAP, we offer over 20 different grant and scholarship loan forgiveness programs. So anything that New York State offers to kind of help students pay for college or also help with student debt relief, you definitely want to make sure that students are aware of who we are. And more importantly, we're kind of that second step with the financial aid process where the student is going to be transitioning from federal to state aid, which we'll see here. So let's talk about how to apply for TAP. And this presentation is going to be looking at it from the student experience as they navigate this process. The first thing at the outset that folks need to be aware of is that there are
Mike,
two different. Yep.
Mike, excuse me. Do you have a presentation? It's not showing.
Yep. I was sharing the wrong monitor, the blank one.
So we
you see it now, Sonia?
Yes, we see it now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So sorry about that. So this is pretty much the first slide anyway. There's two different pathways for the students to apply for state aid here in New York State. So this is an important distinction to make. We spoke about federal aid and Sonia explained some of the citizenship criteria, right? So students who are applying for federal aid must be US citizens or permanent residents or meet what they call eligible non-citizen state aid programs to students who may be undocumented or in the DACA program or have different immigration statuses that may not qualify under the federal program. And so, for example, a student who doesn't have a social, who's undocumented, wouldn't even be able to fill out a FAFSA. So we have a separate application process that addresses those students, and we call that the New York State DREAM Act application. For traditional applicants who qualify for federal aid and are going through the FAFSA, there's a connection from FAFSA to the New York State payment application. So I'll spend a lot of time talking about that traditional application process, but I do want to make sure and introduce what the application process would be for a student who couldn't file the FAFSA, but is still looking to go to college in New York State and looking to apply for aid via the DREAM Act. So the first thing you need to know about this pathway for the DREAM Act is that the FAFSA is not a prerequisite. Students do not need to have filed or be working on a FAFSA in order to access the New York State DREAM Act application. So it's independent of FAFSA. It's housed on our website, and the quick link to it is hesc.ny.gov/dream. And it's for students whose citizenship eligibility, like I said before, doesn't qualify for the traditional federal aid qualifications of citizen or eligible non-citizen. But there are special eligibility criteria that students need to meet that are dictated by the New York State DREAM Act law, the legislation that was passed by the state a few years back. So one of those key criteria is looking at the student's educational history. So one of the most common criteria that our DREAM Act students are applying with is their eligibility as a New York State high school graduate who's previously attended their high school in New York for 2 or more years. There are other qualifying criteria that students can look through when they're applying for the DREAM Act. The initial step when they create their account and they start the application is going to be what we call the New York State DREAM Act eligibility application. So before we even allow the student to apply for TAP or any other scholarship they're looking to get from New York State via the DREAM Act, we first need to see, do they meet the criteria under the DREAM Act legislation? So do they have eligibility under the DREAM Act? So there's a special designed DREAM Act eligibility application that all the first-time applicants will be brought through, where the student will indicate what their eligibility criteria is. This slide shot right here, I wasn't able to get an updated one, but when students select their academic year, they'll see the 2022-2023 as in the dropdown. And they'll be able to select that that's the year that they want to start receiving financial aid for. They could also indicate 2022 will be the first year that they enroll for their undergrad studies if this is a traditional a high school senior who's graduating in the class of 2022. And then from there, they would indicate their other eligibility criteria and then the form would then sort of request information based on what criteria they present, right? So if the student says, I'm eligible for the DREAM Act because I have graduated or will be graduating from a New York high school after attending 2 or more years, then the form is going to ask for proof of that high school graduation status. So typically it would request that they provide a final transcript. Now, we have an automated process where students can opt in, where instead of providing a transcript, they can ask for us to verify their enrollment with the New York State Education Department, who keeps records of all of the high schools and students who are attending high schools in New York State. If they opt into that process, then we'll screen to see, okay, how many years have they been in high school? We have a process with SED where that's verified. And if we see that they're a current high school senior who's previously attended for, at least 1 year before. So if we see 11th grade and that they're currently in 12th grade in New York, we give them the benefit of the doubt and we'll make them eligible for the DREAM Act without requiring the student to then upload a current transcript or have to come back and upload a final transcript. Eventually, when the student graduates, the graduation data gets reported by high schools to the state, and then we'll verify later on that the student actually graduated. It's only if the student does not opt into the automated process, or if we're unable to verify through our automated process that the student was enrolled for 2 or more years, or that they've already graduated, that they will be requested to provide the high school transcript as a follow-up item if they are not able to be verified, unless they opt into the manual verification themselves by saying, I'm just going to provide you a copy of my high school transcript. Now, one thing that's important to know is that if the student is opting for the automated process, they don't have documentation at the moment to upload, we still bring them through the rest of the financial aid application process on the DREAM Act application, even if the student hasn't proven their eligibility under the DREAM Act. So we're not going to preclude the student from being able to apply for financial aid programs like TAP just because they didn't have a copy of their transcript on them or they didn't have a document at the moment to load. They can submit that application for eligibility. It'll be held for them until they come back and provide the documentation or our automated verification processes work, and then they're verified. And in the interim, the student can continue on and start applying for financial aid programs with New York State, including TAP. So there's this continue to apply for New York State financial aid link that would be at the end of their DREAM Act eligibility application. And there would be a drop-down list of financial aid programs that are available to students who are applying through the DREAM Act. And they would then select, for example, I want to start college in 2022. So they're going to be looking for 2022, 2023 financial aid programs, and they'll see the option for the 2022, 2023 TAP application. So then they would be brought through the TAP application through the DREAM Act portal. So this is all housed within the DREAM Act portal. This is not going to be the process that we're going to walk through next, which is going to be the FAFSA process, where they then click over to the payment application. This is a completely separate process where they're doing everything within the DREAM Act application portal. After submitting their TAP application, their eligibility application, maybe they want to apply for another scholarship with us, all of their application statuses will be housed on their DREAM Act homepage. And if the student wants to continue and add another financial aid program to apply to, they may do so. And if they started but didn't finish an application, they could resume their application. If an application is complete, they'll have this green status that it'll be completed. So this is basically where they would follow up to make sure that they've been approved, accept their awards, and finalize everything with us along the way, all within their New York State DREAM Act portal. On this portal, there's a green chat button that they can use if they want to chat with one of our representatives while they're on the application. If a representative is available, no one's going to be available at 2 a.m., but during normal business hours, they'll be able to chat with a representative. If no one's available, they can leave a message and they can get assistance with their application if they have any questions. So that's the DREAM Act process. What about the process for students that have gone through FAFSA and now want to transition over to New York State? Well, that's what we call the FAFSA to TAP pathway. And these are the applicants, once again, who are filing FAFSA as a prerequisite application to applying for TAP and have met all of the FAFSA eligibility criteria for citizenship, right? So citizens, US permanent residents, so on and so forth. In order to generate the TAP application link on their FAFSA, the student has to indicate that they're a resident of New York State. And there were a number of questions that came while Sonia was presenting about, well, what if the student doesn't live in New York for 5 years? Should they still put yes so they can get the link for TAP? So what I was explaining in some of the answers I was typing is that the student doesn't have to live in New York for 5 years to qualify for TAP or even to get the TAP link. They just need to have a year of residency, and they need to be able to demonstrate that they're currently a New York State resident. So if a student doesn't have 5 years of living in New York, that's fine. They would simply put no, like you see on the screenshot. The FAFSA is then going to ask them, what is your state of legal residence? If they're living in New York, they should list New York. One common error I see is that if the student just moved here, like a year ago, they'll put, for whatever reason, that their state of legal residence is where they used to live. They'll put foreign country, they'll put New Jersey, California. It's not asking where did you used to live. It's asking what is your state of legal residence, and there is a little question mark help text bubble that can further explain, well, this is where you currently legally live. This is New York State. So the student would say that New York is their current state of residence. And then if they didn't live in New York for the 5 years, they could simply type in the month and year that they became a New York resident. So please don't encourage students to fudge their information or manipulate the application because you're worried they're not going to get the TAP link. They should answer the questions honestly. This is a federal form. And they should just indicate that, hey, I just moved to New York in September of 2020, and then they'll be fine. And they'll be presented the TAP link. The second thing, though, that could cause the TAP link to not generate if they did the New York State residence part right, is did they list a college that is located in New York State as part of their list of colleges on the FAFSA? So sometimes we see students, they contact us and they say, well, I was never given the TAP link on FAFSA, and we pull their FAFSA record and I see 10 colleges in California. So if you live in New York, but all your colleges you're applying to are in California, you're not going to get the link for the TAP application. So at least one of the schools listed in the student's college list should be in New York State. Now, there's going to be questions like, well, what if the student doesn't know where they want to go? What if their dream schools are all in the great state of California? They can include one New York school as their backup. You're always telling your students about, have your safety school, your backup plan in case you don't get into your dream school. I would recommend that a New York school should be listed, at least one out of the 10, so they can then continue on and apply for TAP. And that way the TAP application is applied for in case they do end up going to school in New York, as opposed to just putting 10 out-of-state schools and then having TAP become then a follow-up item that they'd have to then come back to FAFSA, add a New York school, then get the link. So it becomes a longer process. So if all of that is done correctly, then the student will have their confirmation page, which you see here on the left. It says congratulations. It'll give their name. And this is part of the whole redesign that we've been showing you today. So this is a different confirmation for those of you who've been helping students over the years. And you'll see over to the right, the call out for start your state application to apply for New York State-based financial aid. The student would click apply now, and then a new window, they would get a warning that a new window is going to be opening up. They would agree to the warning, and they would be given the New York State payment application, which is the application that they're going to be applying for TAP, and is the sort of application that we require for as the base application for all of our programs. So the student would have this pop-up window. They're ready to continue. They'd click start my state application. The question comes up that what if, for whatever reason, the link didn't generate, or they clicked the link and nothing ever popped up, or their computer crashed, or all sorts of errors happened. What happens if they did not or were not able to use that link on the FAFSA? So it's not the end of the world. The student would have to wait a few days for FAFSA to then process their application, and then they send it over to us. We see that the student didn't file a TAP application when they submitted that FAFSA, and then we'll email, if the student provided an email address, we'll email them reminders to come to our site and do the TAP application. The TAP application can be found at any time on our homepage. There's a call out. If you scroll down our homepage, it says all about TAP. So the student can click on there, and there's some information about prerequisites for TAP and what they need to know to qualify. And then there'll be a link that'll say apply now, and they can apply. But the student needs to make sure that their FAFSA has already been submitted and processed by the federal government. So for example, if they submitted the FAFSA, but it's missing parent signatures, then they wouldn't be able to apply for TAP, because a FAFSA that doesn't have parent signatures is incomplete. So we wouldn't have a record of a completed FAFSA for them that's missing parent signatures. We sometimes see students trying to apply for TAP and they never submitted FAFSA. They saved the FAFSA, but counselors are telling them, oh, make sure you apply for TAP, apply for TAP. And they're clicking on to apply for TAP and they're unable to apply because they never actually finished their FAFSA. So they have to make sure that their FAFSA has been fully submitted and fully processed with an EFC, which means it was a clean FAFSA, it's a good record. And then we'll let the student apply for TAP independent of the confirmation page by going to our website. So once they enter into the application, whether it be through the FAFSA link or independently on our website, they're going to be prompted to create an account. It's a similar process that the Dreamers do. If you're a first-time applicant, we need you to register with us. So they're given some instructions that brings them into the steps for creating an account. They agree to the terms and conditions. Maybe they read this, maybe they don't. They check the box that they did read it, and then they go next. Then they are going to see the screen that has their information. We oftentimes get questions about the screen because a lot of people start sort of freaking out saying, why isn't the address filled out? Why are the phone numbers there? Why is there information blank? How do we update this page? What happens here is if the applicant transferred from FAFSA, a lot of the data that would be needed for them is transferring with them into their TAP application. Their name, their address, their phone number. These are questions they already answered on the FAFSA, so we're doing them a favor, we're bringing it over. So they don't need to fill anything out on here. They would just go next, and then they would be allowed to continue on and update their information if they need to. If a student was creating this account independently of the FAFSA, so if they clicked on the link on our homepage, then they would be prompted to fill out all of this information. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a locked-in identity confirmation for the student who basically clicked over from FAFSA. We get a lot of questions about students who encounter errors with verifying their identity. This identity verification issue happens mostly to students who are not linking over from FAFSA, because as I showed you on this previous screen, if a student links over from FAFSA, we've transferred their identifying information, their name, their address, their social. It's all transferred over automatically from their FAFSA form, and their identity is verified. But if the student goes into our website independent of filing the FAFSA and is putting in their own identifying information, well, then what we do is we then take that identity that they provide us and we check it against our records for FAFSA records that were submitted for the 2022-2023 year. If we can't match the identity that the student's providing us in their HESC account to a pre-existing FAFSA, the student would be then asked to verify their identity using another option. And that option would be a New York State driver's license or ID issued through the DMV, where they could then enter their ID number, and then we can verify their identity through the DMV records. A lot of folks start panicking here saying, well, do our students have to run out and go get driver's licenses and run out and go get learner's permits and run out and get a non-driver's license ID? We're not saying that. We're saying that if the student has already filed a FAFSA and their identity information matches the FAFSA, they won't need an ID because their identity will be validated through FAFSA. If you're helping a student and it's saying their identity is not being verified, then 9 out of 10 times your student is providing identity information that does not match the FAFSA they filed. Commonly, we troubleshoot this. I see different last names. The student's last name on FAFSA was Sanchez Ramirez, but when they make their HESC account, they drop the Ramirez, they only put Sanchez. I see students, for whatever reason, messing up their own dates of birth. They're born October 4th, and instead they say October 5th, for whatever reason. That doesn't match the FAFSA, which has them as born on October 4th. Their identity is going to be verified. So they enter the wrong social. That one's very common. You know, they think they remember their social. They give us the wrong social. It doesn't match their social on FAFSA. So they really need to be careful if they're creating their HESC account independent of clicking over from FAFSA, that they carefully enter their identity information so it matches their FAFSA, including things like socials, dates of birth, and of course, their last names. I'll have to make sure that they match. So if a student is caught in identity verification and they can't resolve it, the fix would simply be to cancel the bogus account that they just created. So a lot of the emails we get from school counselors, the student's identity can't be verified. It's saying they need their driver's license. Our kid doesn't have a driver's license. We say, look, they messed up their account. That's why it's asking for identity verification. Just have them click the option in the top menu to cancel this erroneous account that they created, and they can start from scratch. and then have them check their social security card or whatever, make sure they verify their info and have them start again. So a lot of times we're deleting these accounts that were created. We're seeing all these errors, and we're, helping the student recreate it from scratch, and hopefully they get it right the second time, although sometimes it may take a third or fourth time before they get it right. So if the account is successfully created for identity and identity is verified, they'll be asked to then move in and confirm their email address and select the challenge question in case they ever lock themselves out of their account. They can provide a second email, which is optional. They're also then asked to enter secondary contact information, which is also optional as well. So they can list a parent or a friend or a relative if they want to have a secondary contact on their account. They can skip this. There's a skip button over to the right, or they can fill it out and they can click next. Once they've provided that information, they're going to be asked to create the user ID for their account. So they're simply going to create their own user ID. There are rules about what needs to be included, so letters and numbers. And it can't include any personal identifying information, such as their date of birth or social. If they're unable to create their ID, let's say they enter an ID that's been already taken, or they keep entering IDs that don't match the rules, at some point our system's just going to tap them out and say, okay, we're going to make one for you because you need a little help. So we'll make the ID for them, and then they'll have to record that down. Once they've made their user ID, we're then going to ask the student to create their own PIN number to access their account. Simple PIN, just like their ATM, 4 digits. It shouldn't be any personal identifying information like their date of birth or anything like that that can be easily guessed. Hopefully no one on the call today has their bank account PIN as their birthday or something like that, because that's not a secure PIN number. So as long as they create that, they'll write that down, they'll be able to access their account. Then there's optional signups for email notifications in case of a security event in New York State, and then also just general HESC news and updates. So they can opt into these or they can opt out. It's completely up to them. They don't have to sign up for emails to continue on. Once they successfully create their account, they get this green confirmation check, their user ID. So they have a chance one more time to record their user ID. A lot of my students, they'll print this page or they'll take a photo of it so they know what their HESC PIN user ID is. And now we're brought into the application. And the first thing we ask them is, what academic year are they applying for financial aid for? Similar to FAFSA, they're going to select 2022, 2023. And then they're going to walk through the application instructions. A lot of questions we get is about what is the deadline to submit for state aid in New York. New York has a very generous deadline that we give our students compared to other states. Students have up until the end of the academic year that they're looking for financial aid for to submit their application. So if they're going to college in the 2022-2023 academic year, the deadline to file the payment application for New York State financial aid is July 1st, 2023. So basically the end of the 2022-2023 academic year. With the deadline, a lot of people sometimes confuse this with 2022. So we always get a lot of panic calls and emails on June 30th, 2022, coming June. And folks will say, oh my gosh, our seniors still need to apply. Can you extend the deadline? And we're like, relax, the deadline is not this June, it's next year. So students have 20 plus months from when we open on October 1st to submit this application. But of course, it benefits those who file early because you get it off of your list, you get it done. But there is quite some time if they need it. So here they're going to have instructions on completing the application, and then they're going to go next and they're going to click proceed, that they agree to proceeding into the application, and also with how we share their data. Some of the data is being shared with the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, so we can verify the applicant's income and their parents' income, and also with the Office of Children and Family Services to verify eligibility for things like foster care. If a student is trying to proceed into their TAP application and they get this error message that says you must first submit a FAFSA, that means that we don't have a FAFSA record for them. And that typically happens to students who are trying to file the TAP application too soon from when they just submitted FAFSA. So this often happens at a lot of FAFSA workshops. The student will fill out their FAFSA, they're at your computer lab and they finish their FAFSA, they close it, And then they say, oh, hey, Mr. Miss, I'm done. And then you ask them, well, did you apply for TAP? And they're like, oh my God, no. They run back to their computer, they Google New York TAP application, they get our application, and they try to file it without having used the FAFSA confirmation link. They create their account, they get all the way up to this part, and then it says, boom, you need to file a FAFSA. And the student's like, this is dumb, I just did file a FAFSA. Well, remember, if I just submitted a FAFSA now, it's going into processing. It hasn't been processed, approved, and sent to the schools. It hasn't been sent to New York State. They have to wait a few days. So anyone who gets this error message should wait a few days for their FAFSA to process. And then if it successfully processes with all the signatures and everything like that, they could then go on and they shouldn't see this error. Once they go into the application, they'll see their personal information. Like I said, a lot of this information is carrying over from the FAFSA into the New York State payment application. There's an option to save. So if they're not ready to submit right now, but if they do save and log out, they're going to get a warning message that they have to resume within 24 hours of when they save. So 24 hours is the longest that we keep their application on file. If not, we purge it, and then they would have to file again. So they have to make sure that that if they save, that they return promptly to resume their application if they don't have documentation, they're at your workshop or whatever. Now, if they resume the next day, then they save it again, then they get a new 24 hours. So they should just make sure that they check in every day at least and continue their application until it's done. There's navigation links on the left. So we call these things breadcrumbs. Basically, if they've moved forward in the application and they need to go back to a section, they'll the sections that they've previously filled out will have a link, and they could link back to the first part if they need to correct something on the first part without having to click previous to get all the way back. So what's important on this screen, the basic student information, but there are two important things that I'm going to call out that are on the screen where we see errors that create a lot of back-end processing delays and documentation burdens on our students. Oftentimes, it's not really a result of the state, it's a result of simple application errors when students are zooming through the application, really not reading it. And one of those common mistakes is the New York State residency question. So it's going to ask them on this page. So I've zoomed in. Did you live in New York State for all of the 2021 calendar year? So if they say yes, they don't have to provide any further information. They could just keep going forward and we're not going to ask them for any dates. If they say no, let's say they just moved to New York in September of 2021, then they would say no. And then this next field would be highlighted for them to enter the month and year that they started living in New York. It's not asking them, when did you become a citizen? When did you become a permanent resident? A lot of sometimes our immigrant population will think that we're asking them, when did they get their residency for being a permanent resident? We're not asking that, we're asking, did you live? When did you live? So we've really cleaned up this question to say live and have nothing to do with their citizenship and immigration status. So if a student has lived in New York for all their life, but only recently became a permanent resident, then they could just say yes to the first question that they've lived in New York for all of 2021 and a date is not required. Sometimes we get students that will say no by accident. They're just tabbing through or clicking through, not paying attention. They won't put a date. And then in which case we then say, okay, well, you told us you're not a New York State resident and you didn't give us a date. So we're assuming you're not a New York resident. So any student who makes an error on this or indicates a month and year that's less than 1 year, their account is going to be called for a residency review. And when their application is submitted, we're going to ask them to go online as a follow-up item once their application is processed and complete what we call the New York State residency questionnaire, which can be accessed through their HESC account page, which I'll show you an image a little bit later at the end. So please be careful here because we get a lot of emails and calls from students and counselors saying they did it by accident. They said no by accident, it should be yes. Unfortunately, once they've selected themselves for this review, they have to go through the review. There's no, oops, my bad, let me go back and change it, because we really don't want people manipulating the application because they saw that, oh, if I click this, I got this result. Now, if I go back and click something else, I can get a different result. We don't allow for that sort of gaming on the application. So if they messed up, they can just clarify it by submitting the online questionnaire, and then we'll review it and then hopefully clear the issue. The other thing too they should be careful answering is their citizenship status. So there's a number of options here: U.S. citizen, permanent resident, DACA, undocumented. What we're doing here is making sure that folks who are filling out this application are eligible for New York State financial aid through this TAP application, as opposed to through the DREAM Act. So if a student was filling out this application and they were DACA and they indicate that on their citizenship status, we know to advise the student that this is not the application that you're supposed to be filling out. You're supposed to be filling out the DREAM Act. So they'll get that as a processing message when they submit their application, but they indicated that their citizenship was DACA. So once again, they should be careful to enter what their correct citizenship status is. So that way, what we do is we're going to check it against their FAFSA. So if a student says, oh, I'm a US citizen, we're going to look at their ISA record, which is the output that we get from FAFSA, to see, did they clear all of FAFSA's citizenship edits? So FAFSA checks with the Social Security Administration to make sure that the student really is a citizen. If there are any processing messages on the student's FAFSA record that says the Social Security Administration couldn't confirm you were a citizen, then the student would be asked by their colleges to provide proof of citizenship. And they'll also separately be asked by us at HESC to provide us with proof of their citizenship status, so we can make sure that they're supposed to be applying through this application. And if they provide us with documentation that shows they're a DACA student, then we would just refer them over to reapply through the DREAM Act application. So it's important that they do that. A lot of times citizenship verification is caused by students who've never updated their citizenship status. You get a lot of students who are US citizens who became naturalized citizens who were once permanent residents, but when you transition your citizenship status, you're supposed to go tell the Social Security Administration that, hey, I'm no longer a permanent resident, now I'm a citizen, and then they update their records. And what happens is folks usually don't do that. So when they're filing FAFSA, they say I'm a US citizen, but the Social Security records for them still have them as a permanent resident. So they get this message on their FAFSA saying that they couldn't confirm that they're a US citizen, and then they're now sending us and all their schools copies of their documentation. So it would be a really good best practice for students to make sure that if they've ever transitioned their citizenship status, that they've updated their records with the Social Security Administration. So once they've gotten past that basic information page, they're going to be asked to enter their college information. Now, a college will be pre-populated. One remarkable difference here between the federal and state application is that the state application only allows the entry of one school. So from their FAFSA, we're going to pre-populate the first New York State college that was listed in their list of 10. So in this example, that's SUNY at Albany. So the student had listed UAlbany as one of their first New York schools. So this is the one that's pre-populated here. Students are only allowed to apply for one college when they're applying for New York State aid. They're not allowed to list multiple schools. So the reason why is that some of our programs and the amount that we award is contingent on the type of school that they're going to. So there's a different amount of TAP, a different level of TAP you would get if you went to a 2-year college than if you went to a 4-year college. There's a different amount of TAP you would get if you went to a for-profit proprietary trade or vocational school as opposed to a not-for-profit public college. So we need to know what college they're most likely to go to. Just like we advise for FAFSA, if they don't know where they're going to go, then here they could simply list, well, what is your top preference? What is your top choice? If every college you applied to in New York State accepted you and you had to choose, where do you think you would most likely go? My favorite answer when I'm helping students is, I don't know. And then I look at the student and I'm like, well, why are you even here applying for college? You don't even know what college you want to go to. You don't even know if you want to go to college, but they need to put a college here. If they need to change their college, it works as simply as this. They click will not attend and they say they want to remove the college. The colleges will be completely deleted. They'll click the search button. In the search area, they'll type and enter the name of the school they want to search for, and a list will come up. They do not need to type the full name of the college to find the schools listed. If, for example, they want to go to the College of Albany Pharmacy, if they were to simply type pharmacy, they would see different options for pharmacy schools in New York State that have pharmacy in their name. If they want to go to a CUNY school, they type CUNY, then they should see the majority of CUNY schools who've decided to list CUNY in their name, I believe for the exception of Stella and Charles Gutman, who I think they didn't pay enough for them to include CUNY when they bought naming rights to the school. So you'll have to search Gutman separately for some of these CUNY schools. Once they've selected their college, then they're asked to indicate what terms will they be attending that college, fall and spring, and then they'll click next, and then their college will be listed. The students should be careful not to enter. I sometimes see 4 different colleges here. They say they're going to Hunter for summer. They say they're going to Baruch in the fall. They're going to go to John Jay in the winter. And then in the spring, they're going to finish up at Brooklyn College. It makes it look like the student's transferring college after every semester. So this is asking what semesters will you be attending this college? And most students would be at the same school for both fall and spring, unless they did intend to transfer after the first term. The next screen, they're asked to provide their student ID information. This is the ID number assigned by their college. A lot of students may have this as part of the college admissions process. For example, CUNY students are often assigned their EMPL ID numbers when they submit their CUNY application. The good thing about CUNY ID numbers is it's the same for whatever school they want to apply to. So they could enter that EMPL ID number if they have it. If they don't, then they could simply check the box that they don't have it or they don't know it, and they can move forward through the application. Students ask their marital status. Just one, I still see this. Still to this day, I see students who marry themselves to their parents. For whatever reason, they think they see the word marital status. They think it's about their parents. So literally, I was fixing an application the other day where a young lady married herself to her father. She said, we've been married since 1990. She listed her father as her spouse. And not only did it look gross, but it's hard to fix. So we just want to make sure that this is the student's information. This is the student's marital status. And of course, most students would typically be single. Now the students ask about their independent or dependent status. And this is a key area that you should pay close attention to. In order to claim independence in New York State, we first want to know, is a student financially independent of their parents? So that is the first question that we ask them, independency status. As a follow-up question, we also ask, are they in foster care? Are they a ward of the court or orphan at any time after age 13, on or after age 13? Similar to FAFSA, if they are foster youth during their teens, they would be qualified for independence. They could indicate yes. If they're not in foster care, ward of the court, or orphan, they would say no. But if they have other special circumstance, then they should still try to claim that they're financially independent from their parents. For example, if a student has a court-appointed legal guardian who's taken care of them for all these years, that's not their parent for this purpose that we mean here when we say parents. So they could say, yes, I'm claiming I'm financially independent from my parents because my biological mom and dad are not supporting me. My legal guardian is the one supporting me. So they would just say, yes, I'm financially independent from my bio parents. That's what we're asking here. If they called out that they're foster youth, one thing that's new to our application is this integration we have with the Foster Youth Success Initiative, where the student can fill out what we call the FSCY funds application. So through the New York State Education Department, through this Foster Youth College Success Initiative, the students can access additional funding to help with their additional college costs. So we give the student now this integrated application where they can click over, they'll get the application and they'll be able to fill it out as a call out while they're working on their TAP application. So that way they know, and hopefully for us, this will increase the number of foster youth who are also applying for this very important benefit in addition to their regular financial aid like FAFSA and TAP. If the student is claiming that they're not foster youth, but they are independent of their parents, they're going to be asked a series of independent status questions to test whether that's true or not. So we're going to ask the student, well, you're saying you're independent, but were you claimed as a dependent by either of your parents on their 2021 taxes? Or will you be claimed on those taxes? Those are the ones that are coming up. Will they claim you again in 2022? Will you be living with them, or have you been living with them this year? Will you be living with them next year? Have you received gifts, loans, or other financial assistance worth more than $750 from your parents? Oftentimes, we see students say yes to the first 4 questions and then no to the last 2. And I always ask students, why are you saying no to the last question? They're like, well, my mom has never bought me a Louis Vuitton bag that's worth $1,000. So you're saying, have I ever got a very expensive gift from my parents? And I usually joke with the student, well, you do have the very first expensive gift from your parents, which is your existence. Which is priceless. But the other thing is that it's not asking just about gifts, it's saying financial assistance. So I have 2 kids and they definitely cost me well above $750 per year. So typically a dependent student who is under their parents would be saying yes to all these questions. Once again, if a student is living with a guardian or they have other special circumstances, they would want to say no to all of these questions. So that way we can move forward and ask them what their special condition is. So if a student were to say, no, I'm not under my parents, I don't live with them, they don't claim me, I don't get money from them, we would then say to the student, depending on their age, and these are typically for students who are 22 or younger than 22, we would say, okay, you're younger than 22 years old, you're saying your parents are not taking care of you, what is your special condition? And this is where they could look at the various options. One of the most commonly used options is the last one that says, has your family been involuntarily dissolved, resulting in relinquishment of your parents' responsibility and control? So that's basically meaning, did your traditional family, kid, mom, dad, did something happen to cause that situation to be dissolved, to be broken up, and now you're on your own or you're living with relatives? So a lot of times students are saying yes to that last one. What'll happen is if they say they have these special circumstances, we're going to give them a warning that will let you continue without your parent information. You can see on the left, the links that say parents' income have disappeared. Now we're only going to ask them about the student's information, but their application will be considered incomplete until they've provided us with documentation that supports their independent status. So that'll be something that'll be called out to them when their application is processed. They'll have a missing information request, and they'll be asked to come to their account and upload the same types of documentation that are typically shared with the College Financial Aid Office. The state and federal government, there are many areas where we are in unison for special circumstances, but there are some areas where we diverge. For example, the state does not consider it a special circumstance if a student has a child. So a lot of times we have 18, 19-year-old students who are claiming they're financially independent. And for FAFSA, they were independent because they say that they support their own child. I'm not sure how verified that is by the colleges. A lot of times you see an 18-year-old with zero income saying they support their own child, not getting public assistance. If they're living with their parents, their baby's grandparents, they shouldn't be saying yes to that question on FAFSA. But for New York State, whether they said yes or no to the child question, we do not consider having a child to be a special condition for a student who's below the age of 22. So there are different areas where we diverge for special circumstances, but there are areas where we're very similar. So things like court-ordered legal guardianship, stuff like that, homeless unaccompanied youth, the same documentation you would be telling a student, oh, give that to your financial aid office. You would be telling the student, make sure you upload that to HESC so they can approve you for independence for your TAP. If the student is not independent and they're applying with their parents' info, then they will have to complete the parent information sections of the form. And here's a call out that lets them know that the following questions they're going to be getting are related to their parents. We also warn them that the information we're looking for should be based on their parents' tax returns, things like their names and social security numbers. The first question we ask of the parents, similar to FAFSA, is about marital status, because we need to know whether we have a single parent or two-parent household. One area where we diverge with FAFSA is we do not have a unmarried but parents living together option. The state doesn't recognize common law marriage. So if two parents live together but were never married, they would use the never married option. They would be asked to report one of two parents for that situation. And what we go under is the parent who provides the lion's share of financial support to the student. So if you have a two-parent household, both parents live together, but they're not married, one parent works, one parent does not, then the one who's providing the lion's share of support to the student would be the working parent. If you have two working parents who are never married but living together, and one makes a lot more money than the other one, then the one who makes the higher income would be the primary parent for the state application. Some marital statuses that they enter would require a month and a date. So for example, if they say my parents are divorced or separated, just like FAFSA, they're asked to enter the month and the year that your parents became divorced or separated. Once they go past that, then we want to know, okay, well, did these parents file tax returns for tax year 2022 or tax year 2020? For the state aid programs, we're looking primarily at their state taxes. So the first question we ask them is, did they file a New York State income tax return for the 2020 tax year? The options here are going to be IT-201, which is a typical full year resident tax return, IT-203, which is a part year resident, and then will not file a New York tax return. So if, for example, they say my parent will not file a New York State tax return, they're then asked, well, did your parent file any taxes? In which case, if they say no, my parents will not file any taxes, they didn't file federal, they didn't file state, then they're brought to this unreported income screen where they're asked to report any untaxed income that they earned. Or if they don't have any untaxed income, let's say the parent is disabled and they receive Social Security benefits as their primary source of income, then we wouldn't list that. We want to know about income earned from work. So they would say, no, my parent doesn't have then any income earned from work in 2020. They would click continue. But if the parent worked and earned $20,000 and they didn't file taxes for that, then they could simply enter that they earned $20,000. New York's, we do here, we're not verifying whether or not a parent should or shouldn't file taxes. So I like to kind of clear the air about that. On the FAFSA form, if a parent reports income above a certain limit and they didn't file taxes, that could be flagged by the colleges as a verification item. For our purposes, we just want to know what the household income is. If they did or didn't file taxes, that's not our business. The Tax and Finance Office is responsible for enforcing tax rules in New York State. So they would simply say, no, we didn't file taxes, we earned 10,000, and they would keep it moving. If they did file taxes, then they would be asked questions related to the tax return information. These side-by-side screens are showing you the difference between the single parent look and the two parent look. For the single parent household, they would only be asked to enter information for parent one. Who is parent one? Well, if it's single parent household, you live with your mom, then mom is parent one. You're going to enter your mom's social or tax ID number, and then you can enter mom's last name. We collect tax ID numbers, which is another divergence from FAFSA. So FAFSA doesn't want the tax ID number, but when they file for New York State aid, if a parent does file taxes and they use a tax ID number, then we welcome that number to be reported on our form. Only in the event that the parent does not have a social or tax ID would they then leave the question blank, and there's a checkoff box that says my parent, parent one, parent two, does not have a SSN or TIN. If just one note on that, if they indicate that their parent does not have a social or tax ID, there is a form that will request from the parents to designate that, yes, it's true, I do not have a social or tax ID, and we still ask the parent to provide some additional information to us on that form. So it's not a bypass where, okay, parent doesn't have a social, we don't need any other info. We still would ask for what we call a parent Social Security information page to be filled out with us as a follow-up item. The parent Social Security information page is not a signature page. A signature page is a very different thing. If they file taxes, we'd ask them for their New York State taxable income from line 37 of their IT 201. So hopefully if you're having an event, the student would have brought those taxes and you'll have the state taxes, you'll thumb through it, you'll find line number 37 and you'll enter the amount that's here. The question that we get often following the income screens is sometimes the parent or the student is saying, well, you know, this income I'm reporting from my parents' taxes is no longer true because my parent has lost their job or they're dealing with some kind of financial situation where their income is now different than what it was in the 2020 tax year. For federal purposes, students can contact their financial aid office and they can seek what's called special circumstance adjustment of income, or what we call professional judgment, where the financial aid office has broad authority to edit the FAFSA based on special circumstances like unemployment. For state financial aid programs, we diverge greatly from the federal aid programs here because the state doesn't print money, so we have very limited resources. Our approach here is there are only limited circumstances in which we would perform an adjustment of the 2020 income. Those situations include income that needs to be adjusted because of divorce or legal separation of the parents. So if a parent filed a joint 2020 tax return and became divorced in 2021, they would let us know and they would provide us the documentation, the filed divorce agreement, the taxes, proof of separate residence, and then we would perform an adjustment to adjust the non-custodial parent's income. Same thing if a parent passed away. We've done a lot of these, unfortunately, due to COVID, where a parent passed away, but their income was reported on the 2020 taxes. They provide us a death certificate, they provide us the taxes with all schedules and W-2s, and we perform an adjustment. If a parent became total and permanently disabled, we could also do that as well. So if a working parent had an accident and they now all of a sudden can't work anymore, they're permanently disabled, they would provide us that medical documentation proving that, we would perform an adjustment of income. Unfortunately, right now, due to the limits we have, we do not perform adjustments of income due to loss of employment, due to financial crisis caused by COVID-19. Right now, we're not doing those. So a lot of times we get calls from colleges and from students saying, oh, we're doing a lot of adjustments to income because of unemployment. Can you adjust for TAP? And unfortunately, we cannot. We would then just remind you of what our program requirements are. So moving forward, we ask the student, are any of their parents disabled? If not, they say no, no, they go next. If yes, they could enter the month and year that the parent became permanently disabled. And then we transition to the student's information and income. And here, once again, we call out to the student that this next set of questions are about you, starting with your income. So one thing that we try to warn students here is that not to report their parents' tax information again in the student tax information sections. This happens on FAFSA, and this happens more than we like to admit on the TAP application, where the student will say, yeah, my parent earned $40,000, they filed an IT-201, and then they say, me, the student, I earned $40,000 and filed an IT-201. And they're basically double reporting their parents' finances in the student section of the TAP application. So we can fix that if it was an error, but it's oftentimes it could result in them being denied and cause a lot of stress on the student. We get angry calls from colleges. Why are you denying this kid's TAP application? The family only makes $40,000. And we're like, well, the student also said they made $40,000 and they put themselves at the limit. So just be careful not to double report. Now, if the student did in fact work and file taxes, then they would say, yes, I also filed an IT-201. It would be asked then to report their information from line 37 in accordance with somebody who filed taxes. Most of our students usually are not filing taxes, so they would indicate that they will not file in New York State, will not file a federal return, and then would be asked to report their unreported income. So sometimes the number will be pre-populated here. If on FAFSA, in the example we saw before, the student earned $300 from working a couple, like a week or two, and then they haven't worked ever since, they would put $300 here. And then the next question asks them if they have children. Here we ask if they have other family members who are also attending college full-time. So unlike FAFSA, we do collect parents. That if they do have a parent that's attending college, they could include it. So they would say yes. They're asked to enter the relatives, the family members' first, last name, and social. So they need to make sure that if they do have these family members in college and they're filling out the TAP application, that they have access to that info. A lot of times the sibling socials are on the parents' tax returns. So they can pull off their brother or sister's social from the tax return. If a parent is in college, that's also the social will be found on the tax return. But sometimes your student is calling trying to get this info if the sibling wasn't listed on the tax. Now we're up to the signature part for the parents. And so for parent signatures, we offer either an e-sign or paper sign method for the parent to sign. Depending on if this is a single or two-parent household, either one or two signatures would be required. If the parents are married, then we would accept and process the application with one of the two parents' signatures. So if, let's say in this example here, parent one and parent two are married, then if parent one can sign, then we would move forward with just parent one. They both do not have to sign. If they're married. So we just want to make sure that, at least one of the two sign at this point, and that would allow their application to go through completed. If they choose e-sign, then the e-sign process is based on the New York State DMV ID that they must have. So mom, in this example, must have a New York State DMV issued ID, whether it's a driver's license, learner's permit, non-driver's license ID. She would enter that number, she would enter her date of birth, she would agree to the terms and conditions, she would sign, she would submit. Sometimes we have a red message that will pop up saying it's not able to be completed, something's not matching, something's not working at this moment. I get a lot of folks asking, the why questions, like why isn't it working? Why, is the sky blue? Why is water wet? Sometimes things just don't work. So sometimes the DMV computers are in maintenance. Sometimes the parent's record that they have with DMV, the name is slightly different than what they entered on FAFSA, what they entered on the TAP application. It's not a dead end. What we would simply say is what we say in the note here is that you can't complete the e-signature, it's not matching up. please click for the paper option. So they would click for the paper option and they would say, okay, I need the signature page. They would download and print the signature page or download and store the signature page. And then as a follow-up item, page can be signed and then it can be sent back to us either by mail or through upload through their HESC account once their TAP application has been processed and a request for the parent signature page is being made to the student. For the student to sign, once the parent has successfully signed, they get the indication it's been signed, whether it's paper or e-sign. They'll go to the review. They'll check to see if all of their questions are correct. If they need to modify something, they'll click modify or answer, and then they move forward for the student signature. For the student signature, the student does not need an ID from the DMV to verify their identity. Remember, we've already verified their identity through FAFSA. So all the student needs to do is just agree to the terms and conditions, sign their name and click submit, and then they get congratulations and they're done. The TAP application typically takes about 3 to 5 days to process, depending on what day of the week they submitted it. So if somebody just submitted a TAP application today, we have a holiday weekend, so they probably wouldn't see the status updated until probably midweek next week. They can follow up to check their status using the student access link on our homepage. So if you go to hesc.ny.gov, there's this yellow bar that follows you if you're browsing our site. And that yellow bar at the top screen says student access. And in the student access portal, they could do things like update the college name. So let's say they filed for TAP months ago and now they decided to go to another college. They need to update the name of their college. There's a function for that on here. They want to just review the status of their application, see what their award amount is. If they're missing info, they need to upload a document. They can click on the Review My NYS Financial Aid Information link. If they just simply want to update their email or other contact information with us, they could do that as well. So a lot of self-service options here. So definitely students should familiarize themselves with their account options because, like I said, a lot of the transactions with us are going to be done on this page if they need to update something or submit a document. So that's the traditional application process. I wish I could spend more time on the DREAM Act, but as you can see, the process here for the traditional TAP application is lengthy enough, but we will be looking to do some more trainings and stuff around the DREAM Act, which we would announce on our site for school counselors and college access administrators, folks who need to get more info about that specific process. So I think now we're going to turn to Q&A with our
Q&A. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Lasagna. We've been busy behind the scenes answering a lot of the questions that were posted because with at one time 700 participants, as you can imagine, there were quite a lot of questions. So we've answered the ones that we could and we saved some of the juicier ones for you guys. And the first question appears to be for Lasagna, and it's, would you be able to explain skip logic?
Certainly. It's one of my favorite parts of the FAFSA. So skip logic is when you answer one question, and based on your response to that question, it will determine what section you will complete next. So for instance, in the section on selective service, when a student answers that they are a female, the selective service registration question does not come up because females are not required to be registered with selective service. But when the student indicates that they are a male, then that prompts, or the skip logic prompts that next question to be, if you are a male, then it goes through the questions about the selective service. So that's just one instance. Another instance is the dependency question. If a student answers a question that indicates that they are an independent student, then they're not prompted for questions regarding parental demographics or parental finances. So skip logic is basically your answer for one question determines the next question that is prompted.
Okay, it appears that the next question is for Michael. And the question is, in the past, the HESC website had a box saying apply for TAP. It is no longer there, and it's hard for the students to find the link to apply. can HESC put the link visible on the main website?
So I think I covered this in the presentation because I knew this question would come up. I'll just share again real quick and show how easy it is to get to the TAP application. So all a student has to do when they're trying to get to the TAP application, if they're trying to get into they missed the FAFSA link, is just go to the homepage, scroll down, all about TAP, click on that. They get some information about TAP eligibility, go past that, there's a new confirmation page and apply now. So live demonstration of how to find the TAP application on the HESC website.
Thanks, Michael. The next question is for Lasagna. It says, regarding the household size question, it says, do not include unless the person can answer no to every dependency question. What about an older sibling, 24 years or older, who lives in the household and receives room and board from the parent? For this, you answered that the 24-year-old wouldn't count, but above that says to include if the parent supports them more than 50%, or they can answer yes to the dependency determination questions. Then beneath, you can include anyone else that your parents support. So you can actually include the 24-year-old, right?
So this question comes up every year. And when you're doing verification, it comes up all the time. So I did go back and look at what the respondent was talking about on the FAFSA. I've gotten timed out on my demo site, but it does say in the FAFSA that if the student answers no to all the questions, then they would be considered a dependent student. So a student who, and all of us have had this in our offices, a student who's 24 years of age is considered independent for financial aid purposes. And there are parents who are supporting students who are 24 years of age or older. But for most of us in the verification process, because the student meets the independent definition, we exclude them from the household size because they don't meet the definition of a dependent for financial aid purposes. So I've seen it work both ways at institutions where the financial aid office may have known more information about the students and the student's family and allow the student to be counted in the household size, even though they were independent for financial aid purposes. But most of us exclude that student because even though the parents are providing support, they're having it both ways, and we don't want them to have it both ways. So we would normally exclude the 24-year-old student. Now, in the other part of the definition, it's asking for other people. And so there's other people other than children that the parents are supporting that they can provide 50% or more support. So that student would only be under the one definition, and that's the top definition, not as other dependents.
Thank you. I believe this next question is for Michael. It came through during your talk. If a student who is in foster care, for example, 13 or more, are they considered independent?
Yes, so that's why we call that out. So they would indicate, it doesn't matter what they do, if they say they're financially independent on their parents or not. Anyone who indicates that they're foster care ward of the court, we give them the benefit of the doubt that they're independent. And then we also then do an automatic verification with the New York State Office of Children and Family Services to find out, are they really in foster care before we request documentation from the student. So a lot of our foster youth in New York State, we automatically verify them. But for the ones that cannot be automatically verified, then they would, of course, like the other independent students, have to upload documentation that proves that to our site, and we would clear them. Unfortunately, sometimes foster youth are not properly declaring themselves foster youth on our application. They basically fill it out and then they don't put any parent information. So if they don't declare foster youth status, we don't know to bring them through that automatic verification of foster care. So it's really important that they click the option for foster care. And now also they get that Fisky funds application so they can apply for even more aid. So they should definitely flag themselves as foster care.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to guess that this next question was for you as well, because it came in during your presentation, but it could just as well have been a FAFSA question too. If a student incorrectly answers an independent status question, are they able to log into their application to correct their answer later?
For the TAP application, yes, they can go back in and they can change it. But one thing that we can't do is if they've already filed as a dependent, we don't let them go in and overhaul everything. So now that they're independent, which we do get students trying to do. I just had one applicant I was reviewing the other day. The parents make $150,000. And when they get denied, the same day we sent the denial notice, the student wants to log in and say, oh no, by the way, I'm independent now. And I don't make any money, so I should be on my own for financial aid. So yeah, that's that type of gaming of the application that we don't allow for. Whether or not they go back and they make edits, if a student is really independent, just get their documentation to us and we'll overhaul the application. You know, you get us their legal guardianship court paperwork, we'll just go in, we'll fix anything that got messed up and we'll make them independent. So just get the documents to us.
I believe this one's for you again, Michael. If the student legally changes his or her name when he or she becomes a citizen, what should he or she do when it is time to renew? And if his or her taxes appear under his or her old name, what should he or she do?
So for TAP purposes, if it would be easier for the student to not update their name just for the purpose of income verification being cleared easily, we can manipulate the name too to allow income verification to change. With name changes, if it's legally done and the student provides us the documentation, we also need to wait for their ISER record to be updated. A lot of times we have schools saying, oh, the student changed their name, and we look at their ISER record and the name on the ISER is still the old name. If we change the name on a HESC account that doesn't match an ISER, the student goes into identity verification. So we need to make sure that if it is a legit name change, that the name has been updated on the ISER record and that it has an SSA match. It means it's been changed with the Social Security Administration too. So it is a little bit of a lengthy process. But for our purposes, if we have them approved and we're just looking to verify income and the taxes were done on the old name, then I would just let sleeping dogs lie. I would leave it as is. And then maybe next year when the student reapplies, have them put the new name.
Thanks, Michael.
And I would add, Perry, that on the federal side, for federal student aid purposes, if the student has a name change, we want to make sure that they've gone through all the proper channels for that name change, especially if the name change has been recognized by the Social Security Administration. So otherwise, if they update their name on their FAFSA, it may be flagged for identity, and the school would have to do a verification of the identity before they would be able to disperse any federal student aid. So if the student is going to be making a name change and it's a legal name change, we want to make sure that every agency has been appropriately updated.
Thank you. This next question, I'm actually going to ask both of you to respond to this because it might be a different answer for state than it is for federal, but it might not be. If the student is independent and married, and the student's spouse lives in a foreign country, what should be the marital status for the student? Should it be married or should it be separated since they're not living together?
So I'll start from the federal side. My first question would be to the student, what do you consider yourself? So are you separated for the purposes of marriage or are you separated for the purposes of work? And students will tell you. So if they're separated just for the purposes of work, it's not unusual for one spouse to work in one state and another spouse to work in another state. So if that's the case, then they are considered married for purposes of federal student aid.
On the state aid side, they could consider themselves, similar to what Sonia said. For us, it's just important that we be able to verify that person's income if they do have any. So, for us, if they say that they're married and their spouse has no social, when we run our verifications, we're not really going to find anything for them because if the spouse lives abroad, they would fill out the spouse social security information form, they would tell us, here's my spouse's name, they live in another country, and we would know that nothing's going to be verified for them for income. But if the spouse does have a social or tax ID, then they should report it. And like I said, if they worked and filed taxes in the US and New York, then we would have that info. If not, then they wouldn't. It's for us, it's more really just clearing up. Does the spouse have a social? Do they have a tax ID? And if not, fill out the form and just clear that up.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I believe was answered, but we'll just do a follow-up. Is TAP for everyone? Do both US citizens and non-US citizens, can they apply?
Yeah, so all New York State financial aid programs are available to students, not only those who are eligible for federal aid, right? So it's not only, New York does not only make our programs available to those select group of students who are able to file a FAFSA. We're opening it up to other categories of students. I wouldn't say everyone, because someone who's a child of a diplomat, is not going to be eligible for the DREAM Act. That's not one of the qualifications. So the DREAM Act has specific citizenship immigration status requirements that the students need to meet. It does include DACA, it does include undocumented students, and the DREAM Act is the pathway to apply for TAP and other programs. Students still have to meet the eligibility though. So a lot of times I'm talking to counselors and they're asking me why a student got denied TAP through the DREAM Act. And it's because their parents made, $90,000. They were over the income limit. So just because someone can apply through the DREAM Act doesn't mean that they're guaranteed aid. They're still screened like other students. They still go through income verification. We're still checking to see if they're eligible for our programs. It's basically just the pathway for these select group of students to now be able to apply where one didn't exist before.
Thanks, Michael. Next question, I guess this is for you as well. What if a parent doesn't file a New York State tax return? Say they work in Canada. How does this affect the TAP application?
Yeah, so we looked at that where they would basically say, my parent will not file a New York tax return. And then I asked, does your parent do federal? They say, no, they will not file a federal. And then they get that screen that says, well, give us your unreported income. And there's an option that says, no, I do not have any unreported income. They would continue. But for that parent who works in Canada, they would say, I made 100,000 Canadian dollars. We would say, okay, how much is 100,000 Canadian dollars in US dollars? And they would put that as their unreported income. They would put their household size, and we would base their eligibility on that. Same thing for folks who work for the UN. Sometimes I have these students that the counselors are contacting us saying, oh, the parent works for the UN and their income is tax exempt. Income is income, whether you pay taxes, whether you file taxes, you don't file taxes, it's tax exempt, it's not tax exempt. If you make 6 figures working for the UN, you're supposed to put that income on your FAFSA, you're supposed to put that on your TAP application. Just because it's foreign or excluded income doesn't mean it's not income.
Thanks, Michael. Here's another one for you. Is it correct that students who are US citizens or permanent residents of the USA and who have been attending and will graduate from a New York State high school, but are not New York State residents, can be eligible for TAP? And if so, does the student use the DREAM Act application instead of the regular TAP application used for New York State residents who are US citizens or permanent residents?
So yes, the answer to that is yes. And what happened was when they created the DREAM Act, they knew that there were going to be categories of students who, the dreamers, right? Your undocumented, your DACA students, who weren't going to meet the traditional residency requirements for New York State for dependent students, right? So if I'm a dependent student, not only do I have to live in New York, but my parents have to be New York State residents for the 1 year prior to the start of college. If I'm a DACA student who's living in the US, but my parents are in another country, and I file FAFSA and I put my parents are in FC, foreign country, then I would be denied TAP under the fact that my parents are not New York residents. So when they created the DREAM Act, they said, okay, we have to allow this pathway where we don't start disqualifying all these dreamers left and right because their parents are not living in the US. Because they created that pathway for dreamers, they also had to be fair to other students who are not your prototypical dreamer, who are US citizens, who are permanent residents, who also have the same situation. I've lived in New York my whole life. I'm going to college here. My parents decided they're done with New York State. They want to move to Georgia. As long as they meet the requirements under the DREAM Act, in terms of the educational criteria, 2 or more years of high school in New York State, graduated from high school in New York State, then they can use the DREAM Act application as a pathway to apply for state aid.
Thanks, Michael. Another one for you. If a student did not answer the question regarding their tax return and the student did not file a return, would that prevent the IVP process? Would the student need to go back to the app to answer did not file?
It could. In most cases, it doesn't. If the student is dependent and they said, my parent filed a tax return, but they didn't indicate that they filed one, we're still going to check the student's social to see against the tax records if they did or didn't file one. A lot of times, surprisingly, your students are saying they didn't file on the federal side, and we find that they did file when we do our IVP process. So then we would populate that they did file. If they left it blank and they didn't file, we leave it alone. So we're like, oh, you can't, we don't need a tax status. You didn't say you filed, you didn't say you didn't file, but Tax and Finance is not giving us any record. So we assume they didn't file. If they're saying that either them or the parent both didn't file and they didn't leave, they put will not file for parent, but they may have left the student one blank, sometimes that can hold up IVP. We would need both to declare that they didn't file taxes. So we know that we're getting two, what we call two misses on the IVP records. We're seeing both the parents not coming up because they said they didn't file and the students not coming up because they said they didn't file. Best practices is answer all the darn questions and you won't have so many follow-up issues. So yeah, they should make sure that they're filling out the application and they're indicating properly that they didn't file taxes.
Okay, Mike, don't put the, oh, excuse me, just 1 second here.
You gotta put yourself on mute, Perry.
Hang on, this is a call I have to take. It's my doctor's office. I'll be right back.
Do we have Emmett still as backup to handle the questions? Or maybe
I'll do it.
You
I'll
do it?
do
Okay.
it. So one of the questions is for TAP, a student is considered independent if they're over 22, not like the federal programs which require 22 years for independence, and it's a question mark.
Yeah, so remember, I had sort of said this when we started talking about independence for state aid, that there are places where the state and federal government align. And then there's places where the state and federal government criteria diverge. And where we diverge is age. So the federal government says, if you don't have a special circumstance and you're 23 years old, you need to file with your parents. So you can have a 23-year-old student who doesn't have a special circumstance, they're not in foster care, they're not a ward of the court, they might not even be living with their parent, and they have to file as a dependent on FAFSA per the 24 years old rule. For state aid, if they're 23 years old and they say, I live and work on my own, my parents don't take care of me, we will grant them independence without the need of a special circumstance. So yeah, there's a difference between state and federal aid there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
You back, Perry?
I am back.
Okay.
All right, yeah, Sonia
All
just
right.
took on your duties for a moment.
Well, thank you. So, Michael, is there a reason why the enhanced tuition award application comes out so late? It would be beneficial if students could apply at the same time when they complete the TAP application.
So yeah, this question also dovetails with Excelsior. So the Excelsior and ETA applications are released at a later point in year because they're subject to appropriations in the New York State budget. So we need to know every year what the program rules and appropriations are for the upcoming budget for Excelsior. There was talk a couple of years back about increasing the income limit to 150. So we couldn't start collecting applications now if all of a sudden 7-8 months from now, the state says, oh, by the way, we're changing the eligibility criteria for ETA from 125 to 150. And now all of a sudden we have to go back and reapprove a bunch of denied applications. So we typically wait to as close as we can until we have it firmed up with the state, with the powers that be, that these are the conditions of the program. They're not changing any of the rules. These are our appropriations. And that's when we typically release the application. So it's just an unfortunate kind of condition of doing business with the state.
Okay. Has the New York State programming been changed so that once one parent in a two-parent household e-signs, it says the FAFSA form, but I think they mean the TAP application because they specify New York State programming. that there is no need for the second adult to then e-sign the form? And if not, does the second parent need to still send in a signature page if the other parent e-signed the form?
So yeah, if the parents are married, then we only would request one of the two parents to provide their signature. If the parents say that they're divorced, if I'm filling out the TAP application now and I'm saying my parents are divorced as of recent, depending on the date of divorce or separation, we may still require them to provide information for the non-custodial parent if the divorce was recent and we see that the parent would have been included on those 2020 taxes. So if I say, oh, me and my spouse just got divorced December of 2021, and we're looking at 2020 taxes, we're going to assume, well, because you just got divorced now, your spouse was probably on your 2020 taxes and we need to perform an adjustment. So in that case, two divorced parents, we would require both signatures and both parents' information. But if they say it's two married parents, then only one of the two parents need to sign. So it depends on the marital status that they're using.
Thank you. When a student doesn't file a FAFSA and is only eligible for a New York State Academic Excellence Award, what application should they file?
So for the SAE, it's required that they file both the FAFSA and the state payment application. So that's the rule that's on our site. If you go to the SAE, the Scholarship for Academic Excellence info page, and you look at the requirements for payment of the award, it says FAFSA and it says the New York State payment application. So they would file both of those. If they're a dreamer and they can't file a FAFSA, then they would go through the DREAM Act application and they would file their DREAM Act eligibility application. And then we would then have their award from the State Education Department with the SAE, because the SAEs come to us from the State Education Department. So there's often a lot of confusion about how students are nominated for the SAE. State Education Department provides high schools across New York State with a nomination sheet. You nominate your students based on the size of your high school class. You have 5 or 10 nominations you can make. That gets sent to the State Education Department, and then they say, okay, all of these are fine. And then they send us a file saying, here are all of the New York State students that have been nominated for the SAE. And then we then create their payments. If they file their FAFSA, they file their TAP, we include the scholarship. So it follows that kind of process. But if they never file the payment app or they don't file their FAFSA, then we won't be able to award the money.
This next question, I think both of you will probably like to chime in on. The question says for TAP, a student is considered independent if they are over 22, not like the federal programs, which require 24 years for independence. Who wants to go first?
I think we covered that one. That was somebody who I think has a repeat one, Perry, but I don't know if Sonia, you want to add in on your side.
I
Did
think
you
we
guys do
covered
that while
one.
I was on the phone?
I believe so. So
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, you probably didn't mark it done, Sonia.
Okay. So the next one, about TAP applications. Are student accounts updated after IVP has been completed? Just wondered if that additional step is indicated in some way on the HESC account, and or do students get an email notification?
They get an email notification if IVP fails. If IVP can't be performed, you send a weekly notice to the student via email, advising them to log into their application and audit it to make sure that they provided the proper parent information and tax filing status information that, so we could retry IVP. Like I said, if they don't do that or IVP keeps failing, it's a weekly notification they'll keep getting. If IVP is successful, there's no reason for us to contact the student. We just approve their awards, we put them on a roster, and you folks certify it.
Thank you. Next question. I think I missed Mike's explanation. If a parent does not have a driver license, student must print, get the parent's signature, and upload the signature page to submit the TAP form?
Correct. So if they don't have a driver's license or any kind of ID that's issued by the DMV, doesn't have to be a driver's license, it could be a learner's permit. If they don't, then the only option they're going to have is paper signature. So they're going to have to download the parent signature page. They can fill it out. If they can attach an e-signature to it, we're fine. However they get it, the parent signature applied to that document. And then in the days following the processing of their TAP application, they'll get an email saying we're missing info, log into your account. They'll log in, it'll say we're missing your parent's signature page. There'll be an upload button. They'll upload the file that they saved of their parents' filed signature page, signed signature page, and then they're good to go.
Let me just get rid of this. Okay. More of a processing question. Since New York State does their own income verification with the New York State Tax Department, is there an alternative reason why the TAP application asks for the student and parent to enter their IT 201 info?
So we can award them. We would, if we didn't, we would have to guess what their income is. So we would say, you know, I don't know, will we give everybody a max award and then later on say, oops, you can't get a max because your income is actually over. We need some income so that way we could determine an estimate of their award. So that's why we asked for it.
And
I'm not
I
sure
would
if they want to clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to Mike's question, it's no different than the FAFSA asking for information on the FAFSA and then even the verification process, because you ask the questions so that you can make a tentative award. And sometimes after the verification process, that award may change. Otherwise, you couldn't award students up front. And income verification IVP process, it's done much sooner now, but in the past, sometimes that didn't happen for quite a while. And you weren't able to award TAP if we didn't have that information, like Mike said.
Okay, Sonia, this one's for you. Student answered to be in legal guardianship on the FAFSA. But when the court documentation is received, it says a student is in custody instead of legal guardianship. Do we change the question on the FAFSA to no for legal guardianship and perform a PJ once the student's situation is evaluated?
So if you got the documentation and it says the student is in a custody situation, I would reach out to the student to get some explanation of what's going on, or to the guardians as to what's going on. And then based on their response, determine if the student is truly a dependent student and which parental income information needs to be reported, or if a PJ is warranted for dependency override.
Yeah, I've seen custody awarded because the parent is in the military and they're on active duty for however many months, and then they come back and then the custody order expires and they're back to being dependent. So yeah, I think not every custody is the same.
Right. And I've seen custody awarded because the parents moved out of state and the students wanted to complete their senior year in the school district that they were in. So you can't look at it at face value. You got to do a little bit more research and contact the family.
Thank you. Next question. We've seen where the student with one parent puts them on the FAFSA as parent 2, but for TAP puts them as parent 1. So it's not processed due to missing parent signature. Is there a way to verify signature by parent name or social security number?
So what happens is with us, the signature process on the TAP side is independent than the signature process on the federal side. So whether or not the student is indicating the parent is the parent 1 or parent 2, they're still going to be asked to either download a signature page or e-sign for that specific parent. So the TAP application would still need to be signed. So I'm not sure, maybe more clarifying. We need more clarification about what the specific issue is, because we're not going by the assigned parent on the FAFSA. We don't even bring over parent socials anymore from FAFSA. The student has to enter that information themselves in the parent section. The only thing that might appear is the last name, but they still have to then go in and put in a social for the parent. So they get to assign or reassign the parent to parent 1, parent 2. And for my, loyal financial aid administrators who are out there, it does not matter who is parent 1 and parent 2 on the TAP application. I have a lot of administrators, they go into student record maintenance. They start flipping the parents from parent 1 to parent 2. They're like, oh, it's mom needs to be parent 2. And it messes with the signature because parent 1 was mom signed. And then we get an administrator coming in saying, oh, no, mom's supposed to be parent 2 because that's how FAFSA has it. You mess with the signature status like that. So please do not touch that part of the application. If it's already been signed and that's not the issue, then you don't need to manipulate the parent data on there. If you're manipulating it for IVP, then you should just be fixing the social or the last name of the parent, not reassigning it.
All right, Mike, if a student's income has been changed on the FAFSA after doing both FAFSA and TAP, does HESC have a way to know, or will the income remain the same as of the date transferred?
So the income information, remember, is another one of those kind of independently reported data fields. So if the student said my income is 0, and then through federal verification, you go in and say, no, it's not 0, it's actually 10,000. we're verifying income on our own separate from whatever's going on FAFSA. So whatever, an administrator does to change FAFSA, whatever a student goes in and changes the data on FAFSA is not going to impact the TAP application. If the student goes into the TAP application itself, then they could manipulate the income information only if it hasn't been verified. Once we verify the income, the fields lock and they can't modify that answer. Same thing on the administrator side. We don't allow schools to modify income for already verified applications. So pre-verification, you can do it directly on the TAP application or student record maintenance. After verification, you can't touch it. Only HES can adjust.
Thanks, Mike. I know you went through the independent regulations before, but there were a couple of questions that came in asking for clarification in the last 5 minutes. One is one additional question for TAP independent status. What if the student is over 22 but still living with a parent? And the other is clarifying, so a student is automatically independent on TAP if they are 22? I thought it was 35. Can you say more?
Sure. So I never used the word automatic when I presented the independence information. So whoever heard that should rerun back the tape. What I said is that the students have to qualify themselves by saying they're financially independent from their parents. If they're 22 years old or older and they've qualified themselves that I am financially independent from my parents do not claim me, I do not live with my parents, they do not provide me more than $750 in gifts, loans, or financial assistance, then we will take that as benefit of the doubt. You're over 22, you're saying you're on your own financially, the student is granted independence. If the student says, who's over 22, says, I'm financially independent from my parents, but then on those subsequent questions, they say, oh, by the way, I do live with them still. Well, that disqualifies their claim for financial independence. The automatic age for financial independence for anyone by simply looking at their age is 36 and older. So if I'm 36 years old and I fill out a TAP application, and no matter what I say, I'm financially independent, I'm not, 36 years old and older, we automatically qualify them for independence by age. So like FAFSA is 24, for the state it's 36. They're younger than 36, then they have to pass the test of being financially independent from their parents. If they're saying that they're financially independent from their parents, but they happen to be younger than 22, then we look for a qualifying special circumstance as to why someone who's in that young age would be independent from their parents. And that's where we look for foster care, legal guardianship, stuff like that.
Okay, we're down to the last 3 questions. When the New York State TAP award is decreased upon income verification, do the students get notified?
Yes, they get a generic email notification. So we never send students very detailed emails about private and sensitive information. So they're not going to get a whole long email that says, dear student, you said your parents' income was, 0, but when we did income verification, we found out it was $12,785. What they're going to be told is they're going to be told, there's been an update to your account, please log in and see. And they're going to see a message saying that as a result of income verification, your award has been decreased. If they have further questions, they can schedule an appointment with us and we would explain it to them in more detail.
Awesome. Once TAP is processed, how long until IVP takes place?
So we post the IVP calendar on the HESC website in the financial aid administrators area in the TAP processing schedule. So you can see our weekly IVP runs. We run different types of IVP cycles. There's a cycle for first-time IVP students. There's a cycle for reruns for students who previously weren't matched. There's a cycle that we run just for denied applications. So we double check. If somebody puts by accident that their income was 100,000 when it really was 10, we run a special IVP cycle for that and it catches it. And sometimes students will get approved because we found the mistake in the income. So you can look at our TAP processing schedule to see when IVP takes place.
And the final question, as a follow-up to a prior question, is it correct that the student can tell if IVP has been completed by looking at their submitted TAP application data? If the form states for the income line item that the answer cannot be modified, then the student will know that IVP has been completed?
Yes, so that would be if the student is willing to dig further, then yeah, they can look at they can go and try to edit their TAP application. And if they see that those edits are locked, for income, then that would be a giveaway that income verification has been performed. Once again, for us, like if the award is being changed, they get a notice, they get a status notice that says your award has been increased because of income verification, your award has been decreased. So they get that notice. If IVP is successful and there's no changes, then the student doesn't get any update because nothing's changed. Their award is confirmed, it's being rostered to the school, and it's with the school for their certification.
Okay, so that concludes the Q&A. Lasagna, Michael, thank you very much. And Lynn, I'll turn it back over to you.
In closing, we want to thank everyone for attending today. We hope this was worth your time. I want to give another huge thank you to Michael and Lasagna and Perry and Emmett for a great job with this presentation every year. To the audience, shortly you will be receiving a survey regarding today's training. Please take a few minutes to respond. And if there are people out there who work in school counseling or college access who are interested in presenting with us as financial aid advisors to try and come up with something that'll further help smooth the transition for our students, by all means, use that survey and reach out to us and we will get in touch with you. In terms of the recording and the handout, our goal is to have those available on Monday. And again, that's NYSPA.org/free-webinar-archives. You'll also get an email letting you know when that's up. So again, from NYSPA, thank you for joining us. Be safe, be well, and with love from NYSPA, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.